You feel it before you can name it, the soft click of an unseen relay inside your life, the hush that falls when the universe holds its breath. Something has slipped out of alignment with your old story and into coherence with your true frequency. You don't force it, you notice it, like a distant beacon waking, pulsing at the exact tempo of your heartbeat. The room stays the same, but the field changes. Your old identity doesn't vanish, it loosens. A knot unties. A long-held password expires. You remember how the former you was assembled. Fragments of praise and punishment, mirrors that weren't clean, opinions that stuck like burrs to wet clothing. That version could hustle, could perform, could survive, but it could not command. Command requires presence, and presence requires truth. Tonight, truth arrives like a geometry, simple, elegant, undeniable. You are more than your rehearsed reactions. You are the witness that outlives them. Listen closely. In the quantum field, observation is not passive. Attention is a tool. What you look at does not merely reflect it, organizes. The observer loop is forming. Awareness, noticing awareness, feedback tightening into coherence. The noise that once scattered you begins to phase, cancel. Senseless motion drops away. What remains is signal, clean and exact, like a tone you suddenly hear after years of static. A sensation moves through your body, warmth without heat, weight without heaviness, precisely where the nerves kept a private archive of every time you were told to shrink. You realize those imprints were not prophecies, only settings. Settings can be changed. You breathe once, slow, and the breath behaves like a key rotated in a hidden lock. Something clicks. The door does not swing wide yet, but the bolt disengages. Notice the mind's impulse to bargain with the past. Let me keep the costume. I'll only wear it on weekends. Smile at it. Costumes are for stages, and the stage you're walking onto has no audience. This is command, not performance. Command is the silent authority of a field that knows its shape. It does not shout, it arranges, it does not beg. It invites particles to remember how they wanted to dance before fear choreographed them. You ask, almost under your breath, if I let go of who I was, what remains? The question blooms into a cathedral of answers. What remains is the uncollapsed you, the superposition of everything God hid in your blueprint and time forgot to steal. What remains is the signal that never learned to apologize for existing. What remains is the sovereign axis that choices rotate around, not the debris of yesterday's storms. Feel the edges of the old timeline now, the routines that pretended to be destiny, the rooms that smelled like your own hesitation. You are not angry at them, you are grateful. They were the scaffolding while the cathedral was built. But scaffolding is not a home. You step away, and even the echo of your footfall sounds different, less like departure, more like calibration. A final check, hand to chest, breath steady, eyes soft. You do not ask the field for permission, you synchronize with it. And as your attention locks into the truth already humming within you, the former settings flicker, then dim. The signal is clear. The relay is engaged. The quantum you is present. Now, command will be learned in motion. Patterns surface like constellations you once mistook for random stars, and now you see the lines connecting them. The same conversations wearing new clothes, the same arguments with different faces, the same exit disguised as opportunity. You used to call it bad luck, now you call it recursion, an observer loop that kept collapsing reality into the frame you had outgrown. You weren't cursed, you were consistent. Watch it in slow motion. A trigger appears, subtle criticism, a delayed reply, the tone that reminds your nervous system of an old winter. Microseconds later, prediction takes command. The body rehearses conclusions before the facts arrive. Chemistry outruns clarity, and without malice, you become the prophet of your previous life. You speak what was, and the field obliges. This is not weakness, it is fidelity biology, staying loyal to the oldest pattern it trusts. But fidelity without discernment breeds captivity. You can feel how the old timeline trained you to be efficient at suffering, how it prized your ability to endure instead of your authority to edit. You learned to outlast storms rather than move the high-pressure systems. You learned to read rooms rather than rewrite the script. That, too, was an initiation into survival. Command is a different rite. It begins by diagnosing the pattern and then refusing the pact. Consider morphic resonance, the idea that forms remember, not just bodies, not just flocks and forests. Stories remember, family systems remember, cities remember the footsteps of those who paced their borders in fear. You stepped into fields saturated with old instructions and wore them like weather. Every time you complied with a lesser destiny, the field recorded it as data. Every time you spoke a truer sentence, the field brightened as if a lighthouse blinked alive for one beat and then dimmed when you doubted it. What changed tonight is measurement. Your awareness sharpened from soft focus to surgical. You are noticing the nanosecond where prediction tries to steal authorship. That seam is everything. The moment between stimulus and spell. The hinge where the door swings toward captivity or coherence. You breathe there. You choose there. You stop donating authority to ghosts that never paid rent. You are not gaslighting your pain. You are relocating it out of the throne room into the archives. It can be referenced for wisdom, not worshipped for guidance. When it attempts a coup, you recognize the tactic. Urgency, scarcity, isolation, the unholy trinity of every counterfeit timeline. You answer with the geometry you felt in part 1. Stillness, abundance, communion. This is how a field stabilizes, by amplifying the qualities it wants to become. Notice too how time distorts around unresolved vows. Minutes stretch in dread, years vanish in avoidance. Deja vu is not metaphysical trivia, it is your nervous system flagging a fork you once took without awareness. You are back at the fork, but you are not the same traveler. The map is new because the mapper is new. This is not repetition. It is review, an exam you will not fail because failure belonged to the student of scarcity, and you are graduating. The mind will negotiate, keep the pattern, just upgrade the costume, call it standards, call it realism. But you can sense the counterfeit. It tastes like stainless steel, cold, efficient, no life. Truth tastes like spring water, clean, ancient, moving. When you speak from command, your words do not clang, they ring. The room harmonizes. People either tune or take their instruments elsewhere. You no longer bend your pitch to keep the band together. Examine the tiny rituals that fed the loop. The way you checked your phone to measure your worth. The way you pre-apologized for needing rest. The way you made yourself small at the threshold of your own gift. Rituals are shrines. Dismantle them with reverence, not rage. Replace them with acts that teach the field your new name. A morning silence that refuses panic. A refusal to narrate lack. A boundary drawn without theatricality. Boundaries, when true, are not fences. They're tuning forks. From a physics distance, think phase transition. Water holds its shape until it doesn't. Heat accumulates, seems wasted, then snap, a new order emerges, and the same molecules express a new life. You have been accumulating invisible degrees for years. Nothing was wasted. The snap you felt was not a miracle breaking the law. It was law obeyed at a higher octave. Look again at the pattern. Thank it for its service. It delivered you to the exact coordinates where it can no longer rule. If it protests, let it. Protest is the sound a dethroned habit makes when air first touches the place it concealed. You are not its enemy. You are its completion. Patterns end by being fully seen. Hold your gaze. The field is listening. The loop is loosening. And for the first time, the you who commands does not need to win an argument with the past. You simply stop arguing, and the past runs out of fuel. Upgrades rarely announce themselves with fireworks. They arrive as permissions you didn't know you were waiting to grant. Tonight, the permission is simple. You are allowed to run a higher operating system than the one you were trained to survive on. You do not uninstall your humanity. You refactor it. Think of your life as code. You inherited functions that once solved problems but now produce lag. The compiler isn't angry. It is precise. You profile the bottlenecks. You rewrite. You ship. Begin with coherence. In physics, coherence is not volume. It's alignment. Waves that once interfered, now reinforce. The scattered lights of your attention phase lock into a single beam, and the field responds like a photosensitive plate, latent image becoming visible where the light concentrates. You used to pour intensity into compensating for confusion. Intensity is not the same as power. Power is patterned. It remembers its aim. When your breath steadies and your gaze unhooks from threat, the pattern emerges, not forced, revealed. Scan the body. Where the shoulders learn to anticipate impact, you release the flinch. Where the jaw stored unsaid sentences, you loosen the gait. Where the diaphragm forgot to travel, you restore range. You are not doing self-care as a performance. You are retuning the sensor array through which you read reality. A miscalibrated instrument makes even paradise sound dissonant. Calibration is holy work. The nervous system is not your adversary, it is your violin. Rose in the bow. Tune the strings. Play. Now invite entanglement, but this time with discernment. You have always been entangled. Every story is a web, but accidental entanglement is how counterfeit timelines recruit you. A message laced with urgency, a smile that hides a contract, a scarcity theater that sells tickets with panic. Command disentangles from what steals signal and re-entangles with what amplifies truth. You align with people whose nervous systems do not demand your collapse to feel safe. You recognize resonance by the aftertaste, peace that doesn't sedate, clarity that doesn't harden, joy without performative glitter. Consider the observer effect again, not as a metaphor but as practice. Observation collapses potentials into particulars. Most of your life, the collapse was outsourced to prediction, old vows picking the same results with grim efficiency. Tonight, you reclaim the instrument panel. You choose what to measure. You choose the questions that shape the answer space. You stop interrogating reality with what could go wrong and begin asking what is already true that I can stand on. The field brightens at once. It loves honest questions the way a seed loves rain. There is cellular memory at work, too, not superstition biology. The body archived the atmospheres it survived. Rooms where you earned love by shrinking, tables where you paid for belonging with your voice. Those archives once auto-routed your choice. Your upgrade introduces a new protocol. The archive is searchable but not sovereign. When a familiar ache flares, you pause before naming it destiny. You place a gentle hand where it burns and say, "We remember. We also choose." The ache does not vanish on command. It relocates out of the command center into the chapel, where it can be witnessed without writing law. And because you are ready, instruction arrives, not from a guru on a stage, but from the field that has been tutoring you since your first breath. Instruction 1. Replace vigilance with presence. Vigilance scans for the worst and finds it. Presence feels what is real without inventing ghosts. Presence is not passive. It is exquisitely responsive. It lets you act from the signal rather than react to the static. Instruction 2. Replace bargains with boundaries. Bargains whisper, "I'll betray myself a little if you promise not to leave." Boundaries sing, "I will stay with myself whether you stay or go." The field respects music more than negotiation. Instruction 3. Replace narratives that explain your powerlessness with practices that exercise your power. Narratives soothe the ego by telling a beautiful story about why nothing can change. Practices change things. So you practice. Morning. 3 breaths counted down from 5, each one widening the chest as if unlatching windows in a long closed house. Noon. A 5-minute audit. What am I amplifying with my attention? Evening. A simple prayer, not to move God closer, but to move you into alignment with a closeness that never left. You don't chase mystical fireworks. You calibrate. You repeat. Coherence loves repetition. Do not fear the silence that grows between words. Silence is not absence, it is bandwidth. The more you stop filling space with preemptive explanations, the more the field can carry the weight of your new instruction set. People accustomed to your old latency may misread the quiet as coldness. It isn't. It's clean signal. Those who can't hear it are simply tuned to a station you no longer broadcast. And then the smallest miracle unfolds. Choices that used to require enormous moral theater become simple, not easy simple. The yes that keeps you congruent, the no that ends an old tax. The pivot executed without apology. You feel lighter not because gravity changed, but because drag did. Aerodynamics of the soul. Surfaces once rough with resentment are sanded by truth until air moves clean across them. This is the upgrade. Not a costume, not a slogan, not an adrenaline spike, but a patterned authority that teaches particles how to gather around your name. You are not waiting for permission. You are writing parameters. The quantum you is not louder. It is clearer. And clarity moves worlds. Command deepens when you learn to steer energy without dramatizing power. The old self-equated power with spectacle proof displayed, applause collected, a summit conquered just to silence a childhood echo. The upgrade understands momentum differently. It knows that reality yields not to noise but to direction. So you begin issuing subtle vectors into the field, clean instructions carried by attention, shaped by language that doesn't leak. Start with the smallest unit of direction, a sentence. Every sentence is a vector magnitude and aim. Your former sentences sprawled like open circuits, sparking, impressive, exhausting. Now they close cleanly. You say what is true and leave it there, unpadded by apology, unarmed by threat. The field responds to closure. It hears the period as a tuning fork. Rooms that once diffused your voice now return it to you, amplified not because you shouted, but because you stopped scattering. You experiment with micro-commands. The morning glass of water becomes an oath. I hydrate the instrument that reads the day. The walk to the door becomes a directive. I cross thresholds without negotiating with ghosts. When anxiety rises like smoke, you don't curse the fire. You name the vent. I let the pressure escape without burning the house. These are not affirmations pasted on fear. They are protocols teaching the system its new job. Notice how boundaries begin to pre-exist, the interactions that once required you to defend them. You used to wait until the breach to articulate the law. Now, the law lives in your posture. Shoulders set, breath vertical, gaze soft, not a guard at a gate, but a lighthouse. Ships interpret light without debate. Those who cannot or will not read it were never your responsibility to pilot. They had their own stars. They preferred storms. From the outside, nothing spectacular seems to happen. From the inside, continents shift. That subtle corridor between stimulus and spell, the hinge you found in part 2, widens to a wide hall. You stroll there. You choose there. You decorate it with practices that feel like home. A private vocabulary emerges, 3 or 4 phrases that reorient you faster than any treatise. You use them like rudders. Stay with breath. Reality now. No bargains. Name the signal. You repeat them until the nervous system stops treating them as visitors and recognizes them as family. Then you test command on terrain that used to own you. Conflict. Once, conflict meant verdicts and exile. You either conquered or disappeared. Now you treat conflict as whether transient, instructive, rarely personal. You ask, what is the pressure gradient here? Where is energy trying to move? And why am I resisting the flow? Instead of pressing your identity into someone else's storm, you let their wind pass around the contour of your honesty. You don't bend into blame or freeze into innocence. You remain contour. You remain coastline. Water respects land that knows its edge. There is prophecy in this steadiness, not prediction masquerading as doom, but a clean sightline into the next probable shape of things when truth is not interrupted. You don't fortune tell, you pattern read. Coherence makes pattern visible. You can see which conversations heal and which only rehearse a wound. You can hear when an offer carries the price tag of your self-respect. You can feel when a room secretly requires your collapse to stay harmonious. Once, you might have complied and called it love. Now you call it entropy, and entropy doesn't get your tithe. A question rises that used to make your throat close. What do you want? You answer without flinching, because wanting is no longer an indictment. Desire, in the upgraded architecture, is data vectors revealing where your design intends to express. You remove the moral fog that used to drape your longing. You let wanting become a blueprint instead of a courtroom drama. You do not worship your desires, but you do not sentence them to solitary. You interrogate them gently. Does this enlarge my coherence? Does this intensify my presence? Does this multiply my ability to bless? If yes, you move. If no, you release. The hallway stays clear. You begin to feel the holy economy of attention. Waste becomes obvious. You used to leak hours into explaining yourself to listeners auditioning for a part they never intended to play. You used to donate days to scenarios that never paid dividends. The new economics are simple. Invest where the return is coherence. Return is not clout. Return is clarity. Return is peace that sharpens action rather than sedates it. Return is joy that does not require witnesses. From physics again, inertia and impulse. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by a force. Your life had momentum in directions you didn't consciously choose, and you mistook that for fate. Now you introduce targeted impulses, small, clean forces, at the right angle, at the right time. 5 minutes of stillness before a hard decision. A single honest email that ends a year of subterranean tension, saying no once instead of managing fallout for months. The vector changes. Trajectories obey modest forces when applied precisely. This is not asceticism, it is artistry. You are sculpting a field with breath, with sentences, with choices that honor your design. The result isn't a performance, it's a habitat. A place where your nervous system stops bracing and starts composing. In that habitat, command is not the performance of dominance. It is service, the alignment of your personal axis with the deeper heartbeat of reality so that what moves through you does not distort in transit. You feel it now, not as theory, but as temperature, the field warming to your presence, like metal remembering it was ore before it became a chain. You do not strain for the next sign. You become the sign, the living proof that authority can be quiet and still be undeniable. The quantum you doesn't grab the wheel, it becomes the road, and everything that needs to arrive finds you by the geometry you keep. Mastery sharpens when you confront the shadow without granting it sovereignty. The old operating system treated darkness as an enemy to be hunted or a costume to be worn. Both were theater. The upgrade recognizes shadow as unintegrated signal data held at amplitudes you refuse to listen to. Not evil, not holy. Information. You stop asking, how do I kill it? And begin asking, what parameter is this trying to protect? The room cools, the field quiets. You can hear the message under the static. Approach like a physicist and a priest. As a physicist, you map the phase space states. Your system enters under stress and identify attractors where you loop. As a priest, you bring compassion that does not bargain. The combination disarms the ritual of self-sabotage. You meet the impulse to run, to pick the familiar storm, to call collapse destiny. You greet it with a bow that says, "Thank you for guarding me when I had fewer choices. I will take it from here." Shadow is loyal to whomever treats it with clarity. It stops screaming when it is trusted to speak. You trace the origin of one recurring sabotage, perhaps the reflex to dim your voice. At the moment, truth needs volume. Inside it, you find an older vow. Safety equals invisibility. That vow once kept you alive in rooms allergic to your radiance. It is not a villain, it is outdated code. You update by issuing a new instruction that does not slander the old. Safety equals congruence. You practice it where risk is small, ordering food without shrinking your preference, naming a boundary before it is crossed, keeping silent, not to avoid conflict, but to honor resonance. Micro-rehearsals teach the nervous system the new gospel. Being fully seen can coexist with being fully safe. Then you widen the lens to timelines. Every choice writes to a branch. Every avoidance writes too. Your past choices carved trails through the forest of potential. Some are smooth from overuse. Some are overgrown but truer. You stand at a junction and feel the gravity of the well-worn path, the comfort of grooves that require no steering. Command doesn't shame grooves. It applies impulse at right angles. Turn 2 degrees, here. Say one decisive sentence, there. Small vectors shift long trajectories when introduced at the correct epoch. This is timeline engineering, not fantasy, not force, but disciplined microforces applied with clean intention. You introduce a ritual for shadow hours, the time of day your signal historically degrades. For some, it is late afternoon when fatigue impersonates fate. For others, it is midnight when old loneliness wakes and calls itself divine. You design a counter-ritual: light, breath, movement, one sentence that re-enters you into coherence. Not scrolling, not pleading, practice. A glass of water held like prayer, a doorway crossed like covenant, a name remembered like birthright. Shadow respects schedules. It learns your new hours and adjusts. You learn to differentiate between pain that purifies and pain that performs. Purifying pain is clean, finite, proportional, metabolized through presence. Performing pain is endless looping, theatrical, purchased to prove worth. You stop buying tickets. If it doesn't end in clarity, it isn't a cross, it's a carnival. You fold up the tent. You walk away without a speech. This is not cruelty. It is stewardship of fuel. Command burns for propulsion, not for spectacle. Consider coherence from a systems viewpoint. A coherent field is harder to invade because interference has nowhere to hide. The more congruent your sentences, the fewer seams available for hitchhiking narratives. This is why you stop explaining yourself to bad faith listeners. Explanation creates seams where none are needed. You choose demonstration instead. Your life arranged in such clean geometry that arguments dissolve upon contact. Geometry is immune to gossip. You notice how the body now reports with precision. The subtle nausea that once meant danger broadens into a vocabulary. This ache says boundary. That tightness says misalignment. This calm expansion says proceed. You become conversant in your biology's liturgy. Hunger, fatigue, desire, grief. Each is a bell, not a verdict. You ring them on time. Bells call communities to gather. Your inner community, mind, body, spirit, begins to meet on schedule. Attendance cures much confusion. Relationships rearrange. Some drift without drama, like boats released by a tide. Others test your upgrade with last-minute bargains. Perform your old role, and we can continue. You bless them and decline the audition. Those capable of resonance adjust. Those attached to your previous latency will blame the weather. You don't refute. You lighthouse. Ships choose. With fewer leaks, joy returns without ceremony. Not the fireworks of victory, but the clean warmth of alignment. You catch yourself laughing alone in a kitchen because a simple task feels like flight. You walk across a room you used to shrink inside and feel taller by no visible measure. This is what authority feels like in the body. Unbraced, it is not arrogance, it is aerodynamic truth. And because you are faithful with small vectors, the field entrusts you with larger ones. Invitations arrive that match your new bandwidth, not flattery with knives hidden in the napkin, but work that requires your exact resonance. You sense the difference immediately. There is weight, but not drag. There is stretch, but not strain. Purpose is not a stage. It is a frequency domain where your design fits like a hand in its element. You do not chase it. You hold form, and it finds you by the signal you keep. Shadow integration completes not with a trumpet but with a silence that no longer frightens you. In that silence, you feel the old vow drop like a coin to the ocean floor, irretrievable, harmless. Above, the surface glitters with a new instruction set. Simplicity, sovereignty, service. The quantum. You stands where fear once issued law and speaks without tremor, not louder, truer. The field nods an exhale across the lattice, and reality reorganizes as if it had been waiting for this exact timbre of your voice to proceed. Strategy emerges the moment you realize command is not a mood, it's an architecture. You don't wait to feel powerful to act in alignment. You draft blueprints and let feeling catch up to form. Form teaches feeling. Like engineers designing a bridge for loads not yet present, you design rituals for futures already approaching. The field respects foresight. It routes resources toward structures that can carry them without collapse. Begin with the tri-axis of mastery: attention, intention, implementation. Attention. You refine what you look at and how long you look. You stop doom, scrolling the past. You stop fortune, scrolling the future. You give the present the authority. It objectively has the only locus where state can be changed. Your gaze becomes a scalpel. 30 seconds of clean noticing replaces 30 minutes of anxious rehearsal. You write a private rule. Where attention goes, loops either die or multiply. You verify it. You choose accordingly. Intention. not a wish, a vector. You state aim with geometry, not theater. I move in truth today is a clean line. I will never be hurt again is a defensive spiral that instructs reality to keep presenting hurt for you to refuse. You retire negative blueprints. You architect affirmative direction. Your language earns the right to be quiet because it is exact. Implementation, the unglamorous miracle. You let small, faithful actions do most of the heavy lifting. Systems over surges. You schedule coherence like an athlete. Schedules recovery, non-negotiable. Breath blocks on your calendar. Food that doesn't scramble your signal. Sleep that primes clarity. You do not perform holiness. You protect bandwidth. God didn't design you to glitch beautifully. He designed you to carry light dependably. You formalize a practice you've been intuiting. The observer reset. 3 steps, 90 seconds. Step 1. Measure. What precisely am I observing? Not the story, the sensation. Throat tight, pulse faster, heat in cheeks, data first. Step 2. Name. What prediction is attempting to collapse the wave? If I speak, I'll be punished. If I rest, I'll be abandoned. Say it out loud. Spells lose power when read in daylight. Step 3. Choose. What question summons a better collapse? What is the smallest honest action that increases coherence now? You take it within 1 minute. Drink water, stand up, send the message, breathe 5 counts down. Micro moves redirect macro trajectories when repeated at forks. Your environment evolves from background to instrument. You remove artifacts that anchor the old timeline, objects that smell like apology, clothes that were costumes, digital threads that function as altars to a previous self. You replace them with prompts that carry your new law. A blank page waiting each morning. A chair that faces light, not a wall. A lock screen with a single sentence. No bargains. This is not aesthetic minimalism for its own sake. It is field hygiene. You reduce visual noise so signal can travel farther. You treat relationships as coupled oscillators, systems that either entrain toward coherence or drag each other into jitter. You test resonance by shared stillness as much as by shared excitement. Anyone can dance when the music is loud. The question is, who can keep tempo when the room is quiet? These are your people. This is your band. Not perfect, but tuned. Work changes, too. You stop making offerings that require your self-betrayal to scale. You choose projects that sharpen your presence rather than dilute it. You align output to design, what you uniquely do with almost no friction. Your productivity ceases to be sprint, collapse, rescue theater. It becomes steady burn, like a star, radiant because it knows exactly what to fuse and what to release. You add a tactical skill. Clean nose that do not leak contempt. Contempt creates turbulence. You decline with geometry. That's not a line for me. Period as tuning fork. The field hears it and reroutes invitations toward those configured to accept them. You trust the economy of truth more than the economy of fear. In the background, an old program makes one last bid. It whispers that destiny is elsewhere after the move, after approval, after proof. You listen and smile. Elsewhere is a spell that keeps you from the altar of now. You break it by committing to a single, precise act in the current minute that embodies the life you say you're building. You do it without ceremony. Rings don't make marriages. Daily vows do. You choose the vow. Again. Then something subtle and vast happens. The field's latency to your commands shortens. Feedback arrives faster. Not because the universe suddenly likes you more, but because clarity reduces processing overhead. You speak precise, you act congruent, and reality doesn't have to detour through contradiction to deliver. Time feels different, not sped up, but less wasted. Kairos threading through Chronos. From physics, resonance disasters and resonance miracles are the same phenomenon at different aims. A bridge collapses when forced at its natural frequency. A singer shatters glass with the same principle. You will not collapse. You are learning your frequency and feeding it truth. You are not the bridge under attack. You are the voice tuned, disciplined, clean carving space with song. Strategy matures into service. Your authority stops orbiting your survival and begins to bless whatever enters your field. Rooms feel safer when you are in them, because your coherence refuses to tax others with your unrest. You become permission, walking evidence that stability can be holy, that tenderness can carry voltage, that quiet sentences can move tectonic plates. You do not crown yourself. You simply stand where the old king abdicated, breath steady, eyes soft, attention like light through a lens, implementation like rain feeding roots no one applauds, intention like a compass that no longer needs to be waved at the sky to work. The quantum U is not arriving, it is operational. And because it is operational, the architecture can now hold what comes next. Authority becomes lineage when you transmit it without possession. The old architecture hoarded attention, credit, power, because it was built on famine logic. Your upgrade knows abundance as physics, not fantasy. Coherence multiplies on contact. You begin teaching by being, not by branding. People come close and stabilize, not because you fix them, but because your field refuses to mirror their panic. Your presence is an invitation to remember design. You refine a paradox that used to confuse you. Leadership without control. Control was your attempt to micromanage uncertainty. Leadership is your willingness to host it. You stop duct taping the unknown to yesterday's answers. You set a table big enough for what you cannot yet name and you let it arrive. Hospitality as metaphysics. Rooms breathe when you do this. Innovation stops feeling like rebellion and starts feeling like obedience to a future already humming. You add a discipline that distinguishes commanders from performers. You bless in private more than you announce in public. Algorithms are loud, reality is exact. You write quiet notes that end decades of tension. You pay debts no one tallied but your conscience. You redirect credit like water toward roots. The field records everything. Energy refuses to be fooled by marketing. It travels along clean gradients of truth. From physics, symmetry breaking, systems hover in a balanced possibility until a tiny fluctuation tips them into a new order. Your tiny fluctuation is kindness with a spine, mercy with a memory, clarity that does not humiliate. You will never know which microact becomes the seed that splits the shell of an old culture. You do it anyway. Because you have retired spectacle, you are free to be precise. The strategic map expands. You stop designing goals that depend on other people's incoherence to fail. Audits of motive become standard. If a win requires someone else to shrink, it's entropy disguised as victory. You decline. Your metrics shift from applause to alignment, from reach to resonance, from speed to stability. You move at the pace of integrity, the only tempo that doesn't tax the soul. The results compound like interest in a currency that never inflates. Trust. You practice informational hygiene, not just what you consume, but what you emit. Every sentence you release into the world either increases or decreases noise. You choose compression, distilled truth that travels far because it doesn't waste bandwidth. You avoid encryption that hides manipulation inside brilliance. Brilliance without benevolence is just a sharper blade. You decide you're done cutting people to prove you can think. Decisions arrive that would have seduced the previous you. Expensive invitations with hidden prices. Alliances that ask you to bend the frequency that keeps you whole. You feel the old surge of flattery try to rewrite your settings. You breathe once, measure the aftertaste, and find the grit of compromise in it. You say no without sermon. You protect tomorrow from tonight's hunger. Command is appetite trained to serve assignment. You become skillful at staying with process. The former timeline worshipped outcomes because it feared intimacy with uncertainty. You sit with uncertainty like an old friend who tells the truth. You ask better questions. What wants to emerge if I don't rush to rescue my image? What does love look like at this resolution? In this exact pixel of time? The answers aren't always comfortable. They are always clean. Clean answers cost less to carry. From information theory, signal to noise ratio, you raise it by subtracting habits that add nothing but motion, meetings that rehearse the problem, stories that defend inertia, performances of vulnerability that never change behavior. You prune. Pruning isn't punishment, it is the mathematics of fruit. The energy you save returns as clarity, and clarity returns as accurate force at the moment it is needed. Prayer deepens into architecture, not pleading from distance, but consenting to proximity. You stop asking the divine to edit reality around your fear and ask instead to have your fear edited so you can host reality. The answer arrives as stamina, holy endurance, not grim survival. You discover that grace is not a pass from gravity. It is the strength to move beautifully within it. You steward paradox with a steady hand, humility and radiance, tenderness and boundary, urgency and patience. You become bilingual in heaven's poetry and earth's logistics. Your calendar tells the truth your mouth claims. Your bank account aligns with your values. Your friendships reflect covenants, not convenience. The invisible and the visible stop arguing and start collaborating. And then the world tests your symmetry. A crisis arrives, sudden, unscripted, perfectly timed, to call your upgrade bluff. Old reflexes reach for the wheel. You feel them, greet them, do not hire them. You return to the tri-axis: attention, intention, implementation, and you add a fourth: intercession. You carry people through the field the way a conductor carries a theme through a symphony, sometimes loud, sometimes silent, always faithful to the motif. When the dust settles, you notice something astonishing. You did not become someone else to navigate the storm. You became more yourself, the quantum. You did not appear as a costume but as a center of gravity, strong enough to bend events toward meaning. This is command, the quiet curve of a life that teaches matter how to move without violating its dignity. You are not extracting obedience from reality. You are revealing the order it prefers when loved. Legacy stops sounding like statues and starts feeling like standards. You write them into the air with every choice. Nothing counterfeit for clout, nothing true withheld out of fear, nothing sacred cheapened for speed. People who share your blood or merely your moment will breathe easier because you chose coherence over theater. You will likely never know the full radius of this relief. You don't need to. Your assignment is fidelity. The radius belongs to God. Integration accelerates when you embody what you know faster than doubt can trademark it. Knowledge used to hover like weather, interesting, dramatic, uncommitted. Now it descends into bone. You stop auditioning ideas and begin installing them. Installation is physical. It changes gait, gaze, grip. Your hands remember what your mind kept postponing. This life is built, not merely believed. You calibrate time, not by chasing more of it, but by removing the frictions that counterfeit urgency. The old timeline taxed you with context, switching the nervous system, paying a toll at every mental border. You consolidate borders. You do work in coherent blocks and let depth outpace speed. Depth has its own velocity. It collapses the distance between intention and effect. Minutes thicken. Hours become honest. The day stops behaving like a thief and starts behaving like a covenant you keep. You upgrade how you start and end each cycle. Mornings, you enter through a narrow gate. One precise practice that tells the field who is in command. Maybe 5 breaths with the posture of a monarch and the softness of a monk. Maybe a single line written by hand. I move in truth. Evenings, you exit clean. Recount 3 places your presence increased. Coherence, ask forgiveness where you fractured it. Release tomorrow from the chokehold of preemptive fear. This is not ritual for ritual's sake. It is boundary geometry for the soul. Beginnings and endings carry disproportionate leverage. You press where leverage lives. Your creative engine changes fuel. It no longer runs on panic, praise, or revenge. It runs on obedience to design. You discover that inspiration is not a lightning strike. It is a grid connection. You plug into practices that keep the line clear, walking without screens, reading sentences that demand silence between them, learning a craft that refuses shortcuts. You treat boredom as a detox from spectacle. On the far side of boredom is focus. On the far side of focus is genius. From physics, constructive interference. When 2 waves meet in phase, amplitudes add. You begin choosing environments, collaborators, and problems that arrive already in phase with your assignment. The resulting amplitude is not volume, it is reach. Your work travels farther with less force because it rides on resonance instead of novelty. Novelty exhausts. Resonance amplifies. You become precise about thresholds. Every elevation requires a shedding ritual, objects, obligations, identities that can't pass through the gate. You don't demonize what you release, you bless it and put it down. A tool that once saved your life becomes dead weight when you insist on carrying it beyond its jurisdiction. Gratitude without attachment is the art here. You thank the shield and hang it on the wall. You'll need both hands free for what's coming. Communication matures from persuasion to transmission. Persuasion tries to bend minds. Transmission introduces fields. You speak from congruence and let people choose their distance. Those ready to stabilize step closer and synchronize. Those not ready drift without condemnation. You refuse the savior role that once disguised your fear of abandonment. You are not abandoning anyone. You are honoring physics. No amount of charisma can substitute for incompatibility of frequency. You practice a rare confidence, moving without spectacle. You stop watermarking every step with explanation. Some plans live longer when they grow in the shade, not secrecy stewardship. You let roots precede crowns. You let competence mature quietly until results publish the announcement you never needed to write. The field appreciates the lack of noise. It routes delicate opportunities toward you because it trusts you won't drop them to wave at the crowd. Watch how your body participates in prophecy. Tension used to arrive as alarm. Now it often arrives as instruction. A sudden heaviness says, slow the decision. A bright, buoyant lift says, send the message now. You don't outsource discernment to omens. You read the instrument you've tuned. Miracles become practical, unlikely alignments, appearing at the exact coordinates where preparation and timing intersect. From the outside, it looks like luck. From the inside, it feels like coherence spending its interest. You refine money into mission, not morality theater math. Money is frozen choice. You thaw it into allocations that extend your standard, craftsmanship paid on time, generosity that doesn't perform, investments that multiply clarity, not chaos. You accept compensation without apology because oxygen isn't a sin. You refuse predators dressed as partners because starvation isn't a sacrament. The economy of truth remains your market of choice. Opposition evolves. It stops arriving as obvious sabotage and starts wearing costumes, flattering delays, almost right offers, mirrors that return a slightly distorted image of your gift. You train your eye to the millimeter. Integrity is a game of small angles. 1 degree off over miles becomes exile. You correct at the first shiver. The no you speak at a whisper prevents the shout you would have needed later. And then you take what feels like risk, but is actually fidelity. You commit publicly to a bar your private life can hold, not higher than your capacity, not lower to appease your fear. Exact. You name a project, a standard, a timeline shaped by reality and grace. You make it visible enough to create accountability and invisible enough to protect gestation. You step into the tension between promise and delivery and let it refine you. Heat doesn't humiliate steel, it tempers it. The field answers with acceleration that does not fray you. People appear who are assigned to this chapter, quiet, competent, allergic to drama. Doors open that require your full presence, but not your soul as collateral. Work feels like weight you're built to carry. Love feels like weather that favors growth. Even grief, when it visits, moves through you cleanly and leaves behind a tenderness that strengthens boundary instead of dissolving it. This is where command becomes habitat. You are not visiting clarity. You live there. You forget to perform because there is nothing left to sell. You remember to bless because everything left to build requires it. You stand still long enough to feel the next instruction form not as pressure, but as promise. And when it arrives, you won't chase it. You'll align, and reality will recognize the signal you have become. Command becomes culture when your private standards start writing public weather. You notice it in small atmospheres. First meetings that used to stall now land on truth without detours. Friendships that once rehearsed complaint now default to design. You didn't lecture anyone. You stabilized your field long enough for coherence to become contagious. This is morphic resonance applied to character, forms remembering themselves because a stronger pattern is present. You anchor the pattern with 3 emissaries: cadence, candor, and care. Cadence. The rhythm of your days ceases to be an emergency broadcast. You move like a tide, predictable enough to be trusted, powerful enough to reshape shores over time. People attune to this reliability. Chaos loses its leverage because it can't book a slot on your calendar without purpose. What used to require adrenaline now submits to order, and order, far from killing creativity, gives it a body to inhabit. Candor, truth with temperature control. You say the exact thing that increases coherence at the lowest heat required. Scorched earth used to feel efficient. Now you prefer fertile soil. Your words land like rain, sometimes soft, sometimes driving, always aimed at growth. You discover that honesty isn't a weapon. It's irrigation, care, not coddling, not codependence, precision love. You steward people's dignity even when you withdraw access. You no longer offer your peace as a subsidy for their unrest. You offer a standard. This is the air we breathe here: clarity, accountability, blessing. Those who want it exhale. Those who don't will claim the altitude hurts. It isn't altitude, it's oxygen without smoke. From physics, percolation threshold, a system suddenly shifts when enough local connections flip from isolated to integrated. You've been flipping connections, breaths into presence, sentences into vectors, choices into parameters. The grid reaches criticality. Coherence becomes the default instead of the miracle. You still practice, but practice now maintains rather than rescues. You extend this grid to conflict at scale. Institutions invite you into rooms where entropy once paraded as sophistication. You listen more than you speak. You watch signal-to-noise ratios in real time, the performative digressions, the jargon that hides fear, the sacred cows fattened on avoidance. Then you ask a short question that collapses the wave. What outcome would we defend in public, and what behavior proves it right now? Noise panics. Signal steps forward. Meetings end early, not because you rushed them, but because ambiguity ran out of places to hide. Your work stops orbiting the fear of irrelevance. Relevance is a moving target designed to exhaust. You choose substance, a frequency that survives algorithms because it serves physics and soul. The response is slower than hype, then suddenly faster. Not viral, vital. The people who find you are the ones assigned to carry this clarity into places you'll never touch. Authority becomes lineage again, but now it's deliberate. You are building inheritable structures, not accidental myths. Watch how the body confirms the shift. Old flares show up as echoes, a brief spike of static in the chest, a memory of shrinking at thresholds. But the decay time is different. Where panic once rang like a bell for hours, it now dampens in minutes. That's not denial. That's improved damping ratio. The system returns to equilibrium faster because friction from self-betrayal is gone. Biomechanics becomes theology. Peace is not the absence of motion. It's motion without waste. Money, time, attention, these currencies align under a single audit question. Does this purchase increase coherence for more than just me? Scarcity culture calls this naive. Physics calls it smarter thermodynamics. Energy invested in aligned systems returns as usable work, not heat. You stop being impressed by expensive chaos. You fund humble precision tools, mentors, infrastructure that multiplies clarity. ROI arrives as compound peace with measurable outcomes attached. Opposition adapts again. It tries to infiltrate as success mythology. Scale at all costs. Brand the miracle. Monetize the mystery. You hear the pitch and taste metal. You remember the vow. Nothing counterfeit for clout. Nothing true withheld out of fear. Nothing sacred cheapened for speed. You keep the gate, not to hoard, to preserve sanctity. This is not smallness, it is priesthood guarding the architecture so heaven's pressure can flow through without distortion. You formalize apprenticeships without naming them that. You don't hand out crowns, you hand out practices, breath protocols, decision audits, language hygiene, generosity that keeps receipts in heaven more than on camera. You teach people to tune their own instruments rather than tune themselves to you. Leaders who demand copies produce echoes that fade. Leaders who teach tuning produce music that outlives them. A threshold appears with no signage. You recognize it by the feeling of weight without dread. Invitations converge, work, covenant, responsibility aligned, demanding, clean. You don't ask, "Am I ready?" You ask, Am I aligned enough to carry this without leaking? The answer arrives as stillness. Not the absence of fear, the irrelevance of fear. You step. The step looks ordinary. A contract signed, a room hosted, a call returned, a flight booked. But the field reacts like a phase transition. Latent heat you've stored for years finally flips state. What used to be hard becomes natural. What used to require pep talks now rides on habit. Miracles register as logistics done on time by people who love the work. This is the quiet glamour of reality running on grace. And then comes a whisper you now trust. Widen, not faster, wider. Make space for the ones arriving from storms you remember. Don't reduce the standard to welcome them. Increase the welcome to help them meet the standard. You open doors with instructions printed on the lintel. Attention, intention, implementation, intercession, cadence, candor, care. Anyone can enter. Not everyone will stay. That too is coherence, love with a spine. You stand at the window of a life that used to feel theoretical and watch it operating. No fireworks, just order humming, just people breathing easier in your orbit, just work that leaves the world measurably more whole by evening than it was in the morning. And beneath it all, a pressure you recognize, the gentle push of a future asking to speak in your voice. You open your mouth, not to perform, but to bless, and the blessing sounds like instructions for the door you are about to walk through. You stand at the edge. That is not an edge, just the next continuity of truth. And the field waits for your sentence, the way dawn waits for a horizon. No heralds, no trumpets, only breath, only posture, only the quiet certainty that command has become nature. The old vows sit like fossils in strata. You no longer mine. You bless the ground that carried you here, then lift your eyes to the work that asked for your name before you knew you had one. This is not a finale, it's a seal. You place it not on events, but on pattern. The pattern says, attention is holy, intention is geometry, implementation is devotion, and intercession is how love moves like weather. The pattern says, cadence, candor, care. The pattern says, nothing counterfeit for clout, nothing sacred cheapened for speed. You feel these absolutes hum under your ribs like a grid, finely powered a lattice ready to bear the weight of a wider sky. You speak the sentence the field recognizes. I agree with coherence. The room answers without echo, because there is no distance left to cross. You have become the distance. Your body receives what your spirit already knew. The quantum you isn't an alter ego. It's an aligned axis. Decisions descend through that axis like clean rain through a canyon, carving clarity where confusion once performed miracles of delay. Even sorrow finds its liturgy here. It passes through you without stealing your map. You bless the ones who tried to love you at the frequency they knew. You forgive the versions of yourself that bargained to survive. You retire the theater of proving. There is nothing left to audition for when your life is the role. The field, relieved of contradiction, tightens its feedback loop. Guidance arrives sooner, correction lands softer, celebration requires fewer witnesses. You have nothing to advertise and everything to transmit. So you transmit, not slogan standards, not hype habits. Doors open because your presence clarifies objectives that used to drown in committee. Rooms quiet because your cadence teaches time how to behave. Work warms because purpose and craft are finally married. You host uncertainty without selling the furniture of your piece to make it comfortable. You move like tide, predictable, powerful, patient. Shorelines adjust. A final instruction writes itself across your inner sky. Widen without thinning. Make room without lowering the roof of truth. Let those arriving borrow your stillness long enough to hear their own. Teach tuning, not dependence. Seed practices that survive you. Bless what you will never see finished. Offer your name to the kind of legacy that cannot be carved into stone because it lives in breath and calendars and reconciled bank ledgers and rooms that end in honesty. You close the loop by refusing to close your heart. The signal that found you now moves through you like a current with coordinates. You do not chase confirmation. You carry calibration. You do not demand easy days. You build days that carry weight well. You do not perform command. You keep covenant with it. And when the next horizon lifts quiet, inevitable, you'll recognize it by the way your spine lengthens without trying, by the way your prayer shortens to a single word that means yes. You'll step as you always step now. Eyes soft, breath vertical, sentences clean. The field will nod, matter will move with dignity, and the world, incrementally redeemed by ordinary fidelity, will feel a little more like home.